Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 157. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Robert Valletta about his new Gaslamp Quarter Thriller series. The first book, Blood Running Hot, is available from booksellers now. In this noir thriller set in San Diego's downtown Gaslamp Quarter district, a former NYPD detective relocates to Southern California to begin a new life, only to find herself the prime suspect in a series of murders. Fans of the genre will find Blood Running Hot contains plenty of twists and turns, a strong female protagonist, and a convergence of seemingly unrelated crimes. Robert is also the author of several other books, including the award-winning techno-thriller Crossfire. In this episode, I'll chat with Robert about his writing journey, how his love of the genre led him to create a murder mystery series, and the real-life inspirations he draws from for his stories, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Robert Valletta, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Stacey. It's a pleasure to be here.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your latest book titled Blood Running Hot. It's book one in your new Gaslamp Quarter Thriller series. So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about Blood Running Hot and what inspired you to write it.
Okay. Well, first of all, the Gaslamp Quarter is a section of downtown San Diego. And I grew up on the East Coast, Northeast, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, lived outside of New York City, lived outside of Boston for a few years. And 3 years ago, I relocated to San Diego County here in Southern California. So Blood Running Hot is a serial killer crime thriller with a female detective chasing down a serial killer and a bank heist. So it's a combination of crimes that all are interrelated. There's a lot of twists and turns. And essentially, what I love to do is I take all of my prior experiences, I take characteristics from people I meet in life, and I create fictional characters and a fictional world where they all come together and get mixed up and turned upside down and inside out. But I recreate it, organize it, and present the reader with a thrilling storyline with interesting and believable characters. I think that's very important, to grab the reader interest with things that are believable, possible, yet still fictional, and to take them on a roller coaster ride, essentially, of ups and downs, twists and turns, always keeping them thinking, who did it? Who killed the person? Why, what is this mystery all about? Where's it taking me? And then ultimately to surprise them, to give a reveal or a clue that they can go back 200 pages earlier and say, oh, I should have known that, or I should have caught on that. But it leads ultimately to great surprise and great enjoyment while they're going through the novel.
So this first book in this series, What was the spark for you to start this series with Blood Running Hot? I mean, what was it that you struck upon? A character, an event, a bit of dialogue? What was it that made you think, okay, this is where I'm going to start this new series? This is where I'm going to start this new novel?
Very interestingly, the start was most likely I wanted to write a murder mystery. I wanted to write something similar to the genre that I love to read, first of all. And it started out with, okay, there's a murder. There's a police department or a detective on the case trying to solve the case. But then, as I developed the story, it became more about who is the victim. We should certainly have sympathy and care for the victim. Otherwise, you're not going to care about who did it or who's going to solve the case. So, little by little, the story developed. I began to layer in characteristics. And while I started with the physical act of a murder, I then began to layer in, well, who is this person and what do we like about them or what don't we like about them? What makes them real? And then you begin to care about that character. So once I developed that, the story, as I say, layers and layers were added over time. New ideas came to me. I started out simply with a male detective in the Philadelphia, New York area. And again, as I mentioned, later moved to Southern California. That had a great effect on me. Started changing things around. I started to think about, well, who are these characters? And in particular, my lead character, I changed to be a strong female detective with a backstory. And I started layering in that backstory. I used part of my experience, which was coming from the Northeast, having lived just outside of New York City and being part of the New York culture for several years. I took that experience and layered that in. But then I included my new experience of moving to the West Coast. And one thing I noticed is there are a lot of differences between both coasts in lifestyle, in attitude, in weather. And all of the differences that I picked up on or was pointed out that I had certain attributes coming from the Northeast by longtime residents here in California, I made note of all of those and I blended that into the characters that I wrote about. So little by little, it started with a murder mystery and a crime to be solved. And then layered beneath that are stories of the people who make up the characters and what drives them. What interests do they have? Who do they care about? And then how do they solve this crime? What questions do they ask? What answers do they find? And ultimately, how does it transpire to a lot of action packed dialogue coming together and a lot of action in the story itself, leading and a lot of sense of urgency, suspense, building to the very end where there's a climax and you wonder whether the main character is going to live or die. You try to guess, wait a minute, who is this killer? Because I thought it was this person, but now new clues have come about that gave you a new direction and a new thought. And the way the book ends, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but I've created it in such a way that the family of characters that you've come to know from Blood Running Hot will ultimately turn up in book 2 of the series, which will come at a later date.
And let's talk a little bit about your main character for Blood Running Hot. You mentioned that the character changed a bit
Yes.
as you were writing. So let's talk about her as she appears now in the story, as she's fully developed.
As she's fully developed, what I was able to do was take the attributes of several different women whom I've known over time or have come to know since I moved to California. And I blended characteristics and traits, past histories of stories that I had heard, and I sort of put it all together. And there are multiple characters in the book. So what I was able to do was take all of these notes of characteristics, traits, stories of people I've known and created each character separately, but tried to make sense of where did they grow up? What did they want to become? Were they successful? What hardships have they had to overcome? And that's everything from race, gender, sexual orientation, obstacles related in the workplace, education. And with each character, so I'll focus on the main character, I wanted her to be strong and tough, yet I wanted her to be somewhat vulnerable. And I added characteristics and traits, physical descriptions. One thing to be said about me, I'm very descriptive. I like to paint a picture of what the setting looks like, what the characters look like, how their gestures affect their body language. So I like to focus on that, and then I layer in the backstory, and it comes up naturally in the dialogue between characters.
And let's talk about the setting for a moment. What was it about the Gaslamp Quarter in San Diego that made you decide, this is a really good place to set my murder mystery?
There was something about, first of all, the Gaslamp Quarter is the heart of San Diego. And again, it's a beautiful port city. We're right along the sea coast. There's a naval base located there. Lots of great seafood restaurants. The Gaslamp Quarter is just a few blocks in from the coastline. It's in the downtown area, so it's within walking distance of Petco Park, where the San Diego Padres play baseball. So although we've just come through the COVID period, there were times where the stadium opened up last year and again this year, and I was able to, and prior to COVID, so I was able to attend baseball games. And unlike any other stadium I had been to before, this has a downtown area where you can walk around. And the Gaslamp Quarter is just lots of great, there's an international flavor of different types of restaurants. First of all, a lot of bars and pubs. It's just a more active area. It's also where the Hall of Justice and the courthouse are located. And as I was walking around that area, I just envisioned this would be a great place for my story to take place in general.
Let's talk a bit about your plans for the series. First of all, I want to ask, when you write these stories, do you know the ending before you start writing, or is it a surprise for you when you get there?
There are certainly things that come as a surprise later on, and they build as you write. That's what makes it exciting to create something. I will say, in general, I'm a planner by nature. And what I like to do is when I start a project, I start at a 50,000 foot view and I try to identify, okay, where is this going ultimately? And then I backtrack to say, okay, well, how do we get there? And there are milestones along the way. So it's sort of like point A and point B being the ending. And then in between that point, there's lots of clues to present. There's lots of action that takes place. So what I essentially did, I came up with a general idea that would take me the first 2 or 3 books, and I came up with an ultimate plan of who do I think who are the good people, who are the bad people, essentially, but realizing that people are good and bad, and there's a mix of that. And even if you have a villain, they may have reasons of their own that they feel fully justified for why they act the way they do. So ultimately, what I attempted to do was create a general outline that extended over 2 or 3 novels, and then focus more closely on book 1, and then start chapter by chapter building it in. And essentially what happens is, while you have this general outline and this fuzzy idea in the back of your mind, who's really guilty, you don't want to start with showing the reader that they have evil intentions. You want them to feel some sort of understanding or comfort with a particular character, and then over time, you want the clues to start to present themselves. So in this case, I created this general idea of essentially a trilogy, a 3-book series, with that in mind. And then the more I got further into writing Blood Running Hot, I decided, gee, maybe this might go 4, 5, 6 books if I did it well enough, if it's successful. And I was really enjoying creating this family of characters within the first book. What I decided, instead of calling it a trilogy, I decided I'm just going to start with, this is book 1 in a series, and we'll see where this goes. But I definitely have ideas at a general level of what I'd like to occur in books 2 and possibly book 3. Right now, I'm just packing everything I can into one story at a time and developing it as it goes forward.
And you mentioned previously that you have several other books that you had written. I'm curious, why the murder mystery now? Why what is essentially like really a hard-boiled crime thriller at this stage in your career? Was this always on the wish list, or was this just the latest, brightest, shiniest idea at the moment when you sat down to write the next book?
Great question, because I started writing, let's just say in grade school, it started with poetry. As I got into high school, it was short stories. And as I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know what to write about or what I was going to do. I ultimately ended up backpacking across Europe for an entire year. And then I found myself in Greece, and I actually lived along the Mediterranean Sea for another year. And I used all of those European experiences to craft my first novel, which was more dramatic, more a young adult coming of age fictional account of a young man not knowing where he's going and traveling through Europe trying to find himself. So that was essentially a compilation of short stories and poetry, which became my first book, and I titled that When School Let Out. And then I used some of the short stories, which were more related to my personal story, and I built the beginnings of my very first novel, which is A Foreigner's Heart. And essentially, that's a fictional account of a young man who travels to Europe and has an interesting story happen in Ireland while he's traveling. It becomes a young adult story of coming of age as well as a bit of romance. So that's where I was in the beginning. Later on, I certainly wanted to write something more akin to what I love to read. So I love anything techno-thriller, scientific, and yet James Bond-like, similar to a Jack Reacher, a John Wick, a Jason Bourne type of story. So I worked on a techno-thriller that I later entitled Crossfire. It was a finalist in the American Fiction Awards. So by that time, I felt I was beginning to develop my writing. I was starting to become more known, more successful with understanding how to. I'm still trying to become traditionally published with a literary agent and a publishing house standing behind me. For now, I'm self-published, and I'm doing it all on my own. And I'm growing and I'm learning while I'm going through this journey. So I wrote 3 books and published them prior to Blood Running Hot. And I learned a lot about marketing and about the publishing industry and my writing as well, all along the way. So it's been a journey of learning, education, experience. And the marketing part of it is something that I never imagined, because typically you think a writer just writes and then someone else handles the promotion and the marketing. I'm now doing everything from working on the cover art to editing and formatting, planning marketing campaigns. So this podcast is my very first podcast. So this is, has me anxious and excited all at the same time. I'll be doing a book fair for a book signing, my very first one in 3 weeks. And Blood Running Hot just came out. Already I've sold several hundred copies. It's gotten onto the Amazon Kindle bestseller list. And these are all things that I've learned. It was the very first time I set a book up for pre-order several months in advance in order to build a following and do a marketing campaign. So as I work on the book 2 of the series, I'm going to keep all of this in mind. My ultimate goal, of course, is to obtain a literary agent and to be traditionally published. But I'll be fully prepared to take the journey to the next step on a self-publishing route if that's what's necessary.
With these different kinds of books out, do you have a favorite format for writing? Because you've written poetry, short stories, now novels. So do you have a favorite format? And then do you have a favorite genre to write in? I know you like reading the thrillers and writing them, but is that the favorite of what you've written so far? So what does your favorite currently look like, genre and format?
I think I've found it in crime thrillers.
Okay.
I think I've developed over time. I think in the early days, it was all about, I want to write something that's a literary, dramatic masterpiece. And I will say this, I always attempt to do the very best writing that I'm able to do. I think along that journey, I became too wordy with a lot of run-on sentences, and I've learned to shorten the sentences, to be more precise, be concise, to get right to the point and not to be all over the place, because you want to maintain the reader interest the entire way through. So there's been a lot to learn, but over that time, I think I've really come to know I love a good murder mystery. I love a thriller. I love suspense and creating that suspense and ultimately creating characters that are believable and having them engage in dialogue and activities that feel real. I want the reader to feel like even if they're on a Saturday afternoon in a snowstorm with a blanket wrapped around them, they're reading about a beach scene in Southern California, and I want them to feel that they're really there, or they're the detective chasing down, and the detective is in danger. I want them to feel that. So I definitely have focused on this area because it gives me a great deal of joy while I'm writing, and ultimately to see readers or to hear back from readers who've read my work and tell me what they liked and why they liked it. And that gives me a great sense of satisfaction.
And along this writing journey, what is the best piece of advice that you've received? Is there any advice that has really made a difference, either in how you approach your writing or how you approach the business of writing?
Probably just the number one, it sounds like common sense, but never give up. It is something, if you truly enjoy doing what you do, and in this case, I love writing. I'd rather do this than any other job I've ever had, but it's tough. When you put something out into the public, immediately there are reviews, and they are not always positive or kind, and you have to have very thick skin. You have to say to yourself, is it worth doing this? And if you ultimately, as I have done, said, yes, it is, you can't give up. You have to just keep trying. You have to say, everybody has an opinion, and unfortunately, they're not all 5-star, unputdownable type commentary. And you have to just say, okay, what I've already published is out there. It stands on its own. Now I'm going to write something new, and I'm going to take all of that feedback and try to create the very best story, the very best book that I possibly can, because I want those negative comments to go away. I want them to turn, and I want to persuade them to enjoy what I'm presenting to the world.
And along this writing journey, what do you find to be the easiest part of it for you and the most difficult or challenging part of it for you?
Well, the easiest part is when ideas come. I think, as in what I'll call in the old days, ideas would come and I wouldn't write them down immediately. And then I would sit down at my computer and I'd try to recall what those ideas were, and I couldn't remember them. So the easiest thing I've done for myself more recently is these ideas come all the time and at the oddest places, when I'm getting changed, when I'm taking a shower, while I'm out for a walk, and at any time that. So what I've essentially done is I have notepads and pens in every room of the house. I carry them with me. So when I have a great new idea, I jot it down. And that way, when I sit down to actually work, I have the words in front of me and I can build upon that. It gets me started. So that's the easiest part, is just grabbing the ideas out of thin air and putting them to paper, and then keeping them on hand to use for a later date. What is the most difficult part is probably promotion and marketing, getting people to know I even exist. So for Blood Running Hot in particular, it was the first time I offered 3 copies of the book to social media influencers who were recognized for having a great following relating to books and relating to crime thrillers in particular. And I reached out to hundreds of specific individuals. Only a handful actually wrote back to say, oh, I'd be interested to do that. And what you realize is, of that handful, only a small percentage actually take the time to then read your book, provide a review, and provide a positive review to help you promote your book and get get people to know who I am and what I write about. That currently is the most difficult. That and gaining the attention of people in the publication industry, such as literary agents or publishing houses, to want to take a chance on me, to do a book deal, so that I can focus on writing something specific that I would enjoy doing and that would be commercially profitable as well.
Well, let's see if we can't funnel people to you. So if people want to learn more about you and your books and what you have going on, where should they go to find you?
Well, they can certainly do a search on Amazon. That's probably the easiest place to go. I do have a personal website, robertvalletta.com, so it's easy from that perspective. And I do have a URL with a Linktree account, and within that Linktree, you can select the Amazon author page, which has all of my books, and allows you to purchase immediately, or you can select my website and read about me, about each of the books I've written, and there are links that will take you from there to the Amazon site. Now, another great thing is you can walk into any bookstore anywhere in the world, because the publisher that I've used for my hardcover editions is the world's leading distributor of books. All of the bookstores, whether it be the giants like Barnes and Noble or the local indie bookstores around the corner, they all are connected through their computer network. My book would be available. So if you'd walk in, and it wouldn't be on the shelf, but if you walked up to the counter and asked for me, they could find it in their system and order it for you.
Excellent. Well, let's hope people do that. Robert, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with Blood Running Hot and with book 2, your work in progress. We'll look forward to that. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you, Stacy. I really appreciate you taking the time for this podcast. It's been a lot of fun.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published, as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author, or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.